One of them torpedoed an Argentine cruiser outside the exclusion zone. Hermes Executive Officer, Commander John Locke, told the ship's company over the main broadcast.
The Belgrado, the Argentinian cruiser, has been torpedoed to the south of the Falkland Islands by one of our SSNs, and in addition, as a result of a seeking surface detection to the north of the Falklands, we launched some Lynx helicopters which carried out a successful missile attack on this particular continent.
Blind, AWOL, one probable target, 01010.
Go flash, direct the radar.